Alrighty, everybody, welcome, good morning. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're excited for spring break. So, while we're watching this, make sure you're writing your notes to submit, and make sure you're also writing your 2 to 3 comments or questions for tomorrow's live stream. Please note you can come to the 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. session, it doesn't matter, as long as you identify yourself so you can get credit. A lot of people are not showing up, unfortunately, which means points will be taken off. Okay, but thank you to those who have been there. I've given you your points. All right. So today we have to crunch all of World War II into one short PowerPoint, and I assure you this is going to be much shorter than you think. Luckily, FDR and Churchill, their war plan really outlines itself and makes it easier for me to crunch everything into one PowerPoint and one video. So FDR and Churchill say, you know what? We have to use this Europe first policy. Okay, the Europe first policy is saying we need to dive into Europe, then we can focus all of our effort on the Pacific. Okay, so it was called the Europe first policy. Star that, it'll be on the quiz. Goal A was to defeat Nazi Germany and liberate all of Europe. Okay, A1, invade through Africa, thus opening a second front, the first being the United Kingdom and Nazi Germany. Goal A2 was to go through Italy to reach the belly of the beast, which means they were coming through Italy to reach the southern part of Germany. Then they were told, we must liberate France. Okay, we must get through to France. Okay, and if we do all these things, we will defeat Nazi Germany and liberate Europe. Goal B was to defeat Japan and liberate Asia, and we would do this by island hopping. And goal C was peace and reconstruction. All right, so let's get started. So, we're going through Africa first. Okay, Italy and Germany are very powerful in North Africa. They have Africa Corps, the Africa Corps in Northern Africa, and in an operation called Operation Torch, General Eisenhower, yes, he will be the president, will be the leader, and he will be fighting against General Erwin Rommel, who's also known as the Desert Fox. Okay, and the goal was to open the second front. It was really the third because the Soviets were charging in from the east into Germany. So we see Eisenhower versus Rommel. Of course, Eisenhower charges through. On November 1942, the Allies invade Casablanca and Algiers, which are both in northwestern Africa. Okay, and once they invade, they make a quick push, and by May 1943, so that's in about 6 months, the Allies destroy the Africa Corps. Okay, and the Axis powers are pushed out of Africa. Our next goal, invade Italy. In the summer of 1943, Sicily is invaded and captured. This means we finally have a foothold in Italy. Okay, so at this point, Mussolini is summoned by the King of Italy. He's stripped of his powers and arrested. Okay, he's the weakest Axis member. All right, he's going to be consistently just shown as weak. And you're probably saying, well, how did the king, arrest the dictator of Italy? The answer was the king was still kept around, but it was a trap. The palace was run by the king's guards, and once he arrested Mussolini, the people were super happy, but Mussolini would be rescued before he could be executed by Hitler, and he was given an army and big chunks of land in northern Italy to defend. Okay, he would continuously fail, but Italy would not be liberated fully until the end of the war. Okay, and the rest of the Italian campaign would be spent in a stalemate. Goal 1C, liberate France. Operation Overlord, otherwise known as D-Day, probably one of the most famous battles in history. This is where General Eisenhower had to shift his focus, and they invaded the Normandy beaches in France, which I've been to. They're gorgeous. Okay, it was a massive air and sea bombardment and invasion. Okay, but the death toll and fighting is just fierce and ferocious and horrifying. If you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan or any of those kinds of movies, the first 5 minutes are just gore. It's just people getting mowed down. It's horrible. However, once this battle's over, we finally have a foothold in France, okay? And the Allies are going to push the Nazis back. They're going to continue to push, and the Germans aren't really going to be able to catch their breath. However, at the Battle of the Bulge, which comes closer to the end of the war, this is the last German offensive. It's Hitler's last push against the Allies, but it fails. There's heavy losses on both sides, and the Soviets finally make it in from the east. They're the first ones to make it to Berlin. Okay, and in the Battle of Berlin, where children and old people and women were all told to fight for Hitler, the Battle of Berlin was lost by the Nazis. The Soviets come in and they conquer Berlin. Hitler kills himself. Mussolini is executed in Europe, and Europe is finally conquered. Okay, the war in Europe is done. I know I flew through Europe, and I'm upset that I had to do that, but we have to get through this stuff. So, goal 1A, B, and C are complete. War ends in Europe. This is called VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. Okay, this happens on May 8th, 1945. Europe is at peace once more. So now, since we defeated the European threats, let's look at Japan. So, Britain spends the rest of the war recovering. The Soviets say, hey, we told you guys we were going to help you out with Japan, but the Soviets back out. Shocker. And the United States has to fight Japan really on their own. The British will send support, but it won't be nearly as much as they had in Europe. Okay, so the United States is left to fight Japan. General Douglas MacArthur is the general who is in charge of the Pacific. Okay, he's in the Philippines for the most part, and he would, and as well as the other leaders, would come up with a strategy called island hopping, where you would take over one island, conquer the Pacific island by island, kind of like stepping stones until you got to Japan. Okay, but at this point, Japan has a death grip on Asia, meaning that Japan had about 3 times the territory that the Nazis had. So Japan was definitely the hardest battle. So, like we said, while the Americans are charging into Europe and trying to defeat Hitler, the island hopping strategy would be put into effect. But the first couple of months, even year, would be mostly defensive. Okay, remember we lost a big chunk of our Navy in Pearl Harbor, and from an aircraft carrier, Commander Doolittle would bring his planes and bomb Tokyo. This would be a huge morale booster for the United States, even though it really didn't cause that much damage. And then in May 1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea, this stopped the Japanese advance to Australia. They had so many lands and islands conquered that they were about to take over Australia. That's how far Japan got. Okay, but the Battle of the Coral Sea stopped Japan, and that's when they started to get pushed back. Okay, but a month later, Japan sends codes, and they're decoded by the Navajo code talkers, which we talked about last week. The code says we are going to attack Midway, and this is a naval battle. It is one of the most extreme and important battles in the history of the United States. It's a turning point for the war, and it stops the invasion of Hawaii. Midway is very close to Hawaii, so if the Japanese took over that, they could easily invade Hawaii. But this does not happen because they are defeated at Midway. So, then we move on to the offensive. So, what we're going to see here is the war's pretty much won in Europe at this point. Okay, we've already done D-Day. We're pushing back the Nazis quickly. We're winning. Africa's conquered. Half of Italy's on fire. The Soviets are moving in fast. So we say, okay, now is the time when we can make a push into Japan. So we take the offensive. At the Battle of Iwo Jima, after reconquering the Philippines, the U.S. turns attention to the next island, which is Iwo Jima. Okay, but this is the most well-guarded place on Earth. Okay, the island is spewing lava. There's mines and tunnels everywhere where the Japanese are hiding. They are the most powerful, besides Japan, at Iwo Jima. And the importance of this is that if the Americans take Iwo Jima, this could be a base from which the U.S. could launch bombing raids against Japan, like mainland Japan, rather than from aircraft carriers where they would be exposed by the sea. Okay, you could refuel. You wouldn't have to worry about going back to landing in the middle of the ocean. So once Iwo Jima's over, the Americans and Japanese both take horrifying numbers in terms of losses. And then we get to the Battle of Okinawa. This is where the Americans saw fiercer fighting than at Iwo Jima. This is probably one of the most famous wars of World War II. The Japanese lose massive amounts of soldiers and 2 generals. Okay, the Americans actually witnessed the generals killing themselves. They said it was since it was a shameful thing. The generals, all the people saw was a swipe of silver, and then the generals stabbed their swords into themselves and basically gutted themselves to kill themselves. And what the Americans took from this and this battle was, wow, there were over 9,000 kamikazes that were used in this battle. If this was just for Okinawa, how are they going to respond when we get to Japan? Okay, we lost so many people. When we get to Japan, we're going to be slaughtered. Millions of Americans will die. Okay, Churchill says, yeah, if you go after Japan and invade on the mainland, they're going to fight inch by inch, and America will probably lose 1 million soldiers. Okay, very bad. And so, instead of invading Japan, at this time, Roosevelt is dead. He's died, unfortunately. And his vice president, Harry Truman, becomes the next president of the United States. So he's going to put J. Robert Oppenheimer in charge of the Manhattan Project. The goal of this project was to develop a weapon so powerful that the Japanese would have to surrender and no Americans would have to touch mainland Japan. So they knew that Japan would be defended and the Japanese probably wouldn't surrender until everybody was dead. So what Truman said to Oppenheimer was, if you can create a weapon that'll really horrify them and in one swift act or display of power, we can end this war, we'll be heroes. So they create a couple bombs. The first one is the little boy, which is dropped on Hiroshima, and it levels the city. Hundreds of thousands are dead within seconds. It actually lands right above it doesn't land. It explodes right above a hospital. There's really no military significance in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. So mostly civilians were just, vaporized by this bomb. That's why it's heavily criticized. However, the leaders of Japan still said, we're not going to surrender. So 3 days later, Truman says, drop a bomb on Nagasaki, and immediately over 200,000 are dead, and the leaders surrender. Okay, the Japanese emperor says, we surrender, and MacArthur says, okay, we accept your surrender. However, these are our terms. The United States temporarily rules Japan for about 7 years. Okay, and while they're there, we create the MacArthur Constitution, which basically lays the foundation for modern Japan, where there's elections, a parliament, a very democratic system. So we went from an imperial dictatorship to a democracy. We're almost done. Goal 3A, we finally got into Reconstruction. The war is over. The United States and the Allies have won. Okay, you've covered most of this in world history, so I didn't want to go too in depth. Now, what we have to focus on is rebuilding. So while the war's still going on in February of 1945, Roosevelt's still alive at this point. Roosevelt meets with Churchill and Stalin. They're called the Big Three. At this meeting, they decide that Germany will be divided into 4 parts. France will run a section, the Soviet Union will run a section, Great Britain will run a section, and the United States will run a section. So they say, through this time, we are going to try to put and unify Germany, but we're going to try to police them to make sure that nothing happens again. Okay, so the Soviets say, fine, that's fine with us. And the Soviets actually agreed to help create the United Nations. So at the Yalta Conference, you need to know the big results, okay? So then afterwards, after the war ends, Roosevelt's dead, Truman's in charge, the bombs have been dropped. Now it's time to really take vengeance on the Nazis. So by the way, there were hundreds of Nazis who were put on trial, but 24 major German leaders were put on trial. This includes generals, Hitler's right-hand men, ministers of propaganda, all this kind of stuff. But 12 of the 24 German leaders were sentenced to death, and the rest were given life in prison. However, many of the Nazis that participated in the Holocaust, several hundred more regular Nazi guards and officers, would be released. Okay, they would basically be put on trial, found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and they would just be released. Their argument was, hey, we were just given orders, okay? And we were told that, we were told what to do. If we didn't do this to the Jewish people, and if we didn't fight as hard as we did, we would be executed, okay? However, this only worked for the lower people. For the higher up Germans, this didn't work. The Germans said, we were just following Hitler's orders. However, the United States and the Allies say, doesn't matter, you still did this, you were still super powerful, you benefited. So this sets the precedent. Individuals can be held responsible for actions, even if they were just following orders. Okay, so that is our video. That is World War II in a nutshell, really in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you again next time. Have a good one.